The former Black Panther leader Geronimo Jijaga Pratt died Thursday at the age of 63 in a village in the East African country of Tanzania. In 1972, Pratt was wrongfully convicted of the murder of Caroline Olsen. He spent 27 years in prison, 8 of those in solitary confinement. He was released in 1997 after a Reagan appointee, a judge, vacated his conviction. Geronimo Jijaga Pratt, his family and supporters always maintained he was targeted and framed by the FBI and the LA Police Department because of his activity in the Black Panther Party. 2 years after his release, Pratt won a $4.5 million settlement of his civil rights case against the FBI and LAPD. The FBI's share of $1.75 million marked one of the few times in its history it was forced to admit culpability in a case of false imprisonment. Geronimo Jijaga Pratt, born Elmer Pratt, was a Louisiana native, decorated Vietnam vet who served in the Army's 82nd Airborne. Before we turn to our guests, I'd like to play part of a radio interview I did with Geronimo Pratt in 2000, 3 years after he was released from jail. We were also joined in WBAI studios in New York for this conversation by one of Geronimo Jijaga Pratt's attorneys, Johnnie Cochran, who died in 2005.
Well, I grew up in segregation, and we had to deal with the terror from the Klan violence and, other forms of ignorance from those peoples. But growing up in that kind of environment instilled in me a pride of or a sense of nationalism, that we can govern ourselves and we can protect ourselves, and we didn't need to be with anyone who didn't want to be with us. So out of that, I was part of a group that was selected by the elders to get military training to come back to the community, and help protect it, relieve the old soldiers. It just so happened that when I was selected, Vietnam was happening, and I ended up in Vietnam and survived that 2 tours, or 2.5. And when I came back, it was shortly after Martin Luther King was assassinated. So the black nation was more or less at one now with the just being fed up. And everyone was saying, look, we have to do something. So us young militant types were employed quite extensively throughout the nation. And so this is how I ended up in these cities, contributing what little I could contribute.
And you got involved then with the Black Panther Party?
Well, with various organizations, including the Black Panther Party. So
how did you end up in a courtroom being tried for the murder of Caroline Olsen? She was killed playing on a Santa Monica tennis court with her husband in 1968. You were caught and charged when?
Well, I was arrested 2 years after that, in 1970 in Dallas, Texas, where I was instrumental in helping to organize the first Black Panther chapter there in Dallas, Texas, and other parts of the South. I was charged because of a conspiracy by the government that was led by the Hoover, what we call the Hoover-Nixon regime, which was an illegal conspiracy directed against the entire left, entire movement.
Johnnie Cochran, how did you get involved with Geronimo's case?
I was appointed by the court by Judge Kathleen Parker to represent Mr. Pratt in the murder case. I had met him and had sat alongside him in another case, the so-called Panther shootout case that took place in 1971 in L.A. It was then the longest trial ever, and all the Panthers were pretty much acquitted of all the charges in that, and it was a bogus case. The court then appointed me to represent him in the tennis court murder case.
And what happened in that first trial?
Well, it was an amazing trial. I mean, we came in there knowing and believing strongly that Geronimo Pratt was innocent. We sought to set out to prove that innocence, to establish an alibi. We ran into some problems in getting other Panther members to come and establish the alibi. Mr. Pratt was in Oakland at the time of these killings in December of 1968. None of the Panthers who were affiliated with or aligned with Huey Newton would come. So Kathleen Cleaver was in exile.
And that was because he had already been expelled from
Mr. Pratt had been expelled, and further, that the FBI had infiltrated him so much that they inculcated this kind of fear and distrust and whatever. They wouldn't let him come testify. So we got Kathleen Cleaver to come back, and she was a great witness. She couldn't pin it down as much as we wanted to. But we still thought we'd won the case. Jury stays out like 12 days or more, and they're hopelessly deadlocked. But they end up convicting an innocent man, and it was all the things we didn't see that took place which caused that defeat. And Mr. Pratt would always say, they're out to get me there, and I would always say, well, what do you mean by they? What do you mean by they? Who is this they? And of course, he was right. And as I said, I learned a lot from representing Mr. Pratt. You know, that a little paranoia is healthy, that even paranoid people have real enemies. And of course, he was right, that it was they. It was the FBI. It was the counterintelligence program. And Amy, how we found this out was through the good offices, really, of Stuart Hanlon in the intervening years after the conviction through the Freedom of Information Act. We were able to find out a number of things. That this man, Julius Butler, who was the star witness for the prosecution, who got on the stand and said that Mr. Pratt confessed to him, and was asked by me, have you ever been an informant for the FBI or any other agency? And he said no. He said no, unequivocally no. He lied. At that point, he said that he informed 33 times. Man, in fact, he was an informant for the LAPD and the LA County DA's office. He was their confidential informant. They'd done that. They had wiretapped our phones. They had had informants in the defense environs, meaning that somewhere in our offices they knew everything we were going to do. They had failed to give us Brady material, that is exculpatory material, where the husband of this lady who was shot had positively identified 2 other people. They kept that from us. They did all these things in an effort to neutralize, which meant kill, destroy, lock up forever Geronimo Pratt at the behest of J. Edgar Hoover.
Geronimo, before you were set free, 26 years and 7 months after you went to prison, you were in solitary for 8 years.
Yes.
We can say that, but what does that mean? What is life like in solitary? Where were you kept?
Well, I was kept in the hole in San Quentin and Folsom. I started in the hole in Dallas, Texas, where I was busted, and then on to the holes in Los Angeles County Jail, which is like nightmares when you're talking about the holes in Texas and LA County, the old county jail, and then on to the holes in state prisons. But what it means is that this country tortures people, and right now, Hugo Pinell is going into his 27th year in the hole. Woodfox and Wallace and King, who are in Angola State Prison in Louisiana, are going into their 23rd year in the hole. So when you talk about 8 years in the hole, and you look at this ongoing today, it's hard for me to even talk about those 8 years because it's happening right now.
How many hours a day are you kept in this single cell? 24
hours a day. And then after the second year, it became 23 and a half. They will let you out for half an hour.
To those who say that the system has proved that it works by ultimately you being exonerated, what do you say?
I'll say that that's not that's the evidence to the contrary, that it doesn't work too well. All of my 7 years of my 20s, every minute of my 30s, every second of my 40s were taken away from me. If that's a system working, then I think something wrong with your thinking.
Geronimo Jijaga, born Elmer Pratt, speaking in the studios of WBAI with Juan Gonzalez and me, along with one of his attorneys, the late Johnnie Cochran. Yes, Johnnie Cochran of OJ fame, said that this case, the case of Geronimo Jijaga, was the most important of his life, and the happiest day was the day that he was released. Also in that studio that day, and joining us today from San Francisco, is Geronimo Jijaga's friend and former attorney, Stuart Hanlon. Hanlon's a criminal lawyer who began working on Pratt's case when he was a law student and stayed for 23 years until Pratt won his freedom in '97. And we're joined on the phone from Los Angeles by Ed Boyer, who began writing about Pratt's case in the early '90s for the Los Angeles Times, where he was a reporter for 20 years, now retired. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Stuart Hanlon, let's go to you first. The news of the death of Geronimo Jijaga, you remained his friend to the end. He died in Tanzania. He was living there?
Right, he died. I think he'd left about 3 weeks before from Louisiana, and he had a great trip out here in California, and he seemed terrific, and it was a real shock, obviously. He just had such a great time when he was out in California with his daughter, seeing me and some other people, but, you know, life is short.
Well, first, our condolences to you and to his family, who he's living with in Tanzania. In a nutshell, describe this case, and especially for young people, describe what COINTELPRO is, the counterintelligence program, and how a Reagan-appointed judge ultimately overturned the conviction of Geronimo Jijaga, the jury never having known that the person who pointed the finger at Geronimo Jijaga falsely was a police and FBI informant.
I think the place to start is the question that you guys asked Geronimo years ago. Do you think it proves the system works because you won? And Johnny at one point, it's one of the few differences he and I had, and he said the same system that locked up Geronimo let him free. Well, the system doesn't work. And if it took, as Geronimo pointed out, it took 27 years of his life to free an innocent man. And what people should understand, and which I think we kind of understood back then, but not to the extent it was proven, is that our government, and you say government because it is the FBI with the president, local law enforcement in Los Angeles, district attorneys, conspire to convict somebody and lock them up and have them face the death penalty because of their political beliefs and affiliations. Is that back in the 60s and early 70s, the Panthers were considered by J. Edgar Hoover and many others, especially in the white community, as the #1 threat to the safety of America. And imagine that we felt that a group of young African Americans, probably less than 1,000 throughout the country, were the #1 threat to our internal safety. And because of that, these law enforcement people and judges and district attorneys felt that the ends justified the means to get rid of them by any means necessary. And we've learned that Fred Hampton was murdered, another Panther, in Chicago, and Geronimo was framed. And people say, how do you know it was framed? It was just some technicality. And I think the best image is that Julio Butler was asked by Johnny on a number of occasions, were you an informant for any agency? And he said over and over, no. And as it turned out, and I think what got Judge Dickey, is that he was an informant not just for the FBI, but for the LA Police Department, and finally for the LA District Attorney's Office. And these three agencies sat in court, because the FBI was there, and let this man lie and commit perjury to convict somebody. That's not a technicality. That's the breakdown of our criminal justice system. That's the highest level of people involved letting someone commit perjury because they don't like him and like his beliefs. And I think the last question you asked, Amy, what does this say to people today, young people like Geronimo and I were 40-some years ago, and even Johnny was pretty young back then, that paranoia is healthy, that now our new enemy may not be the Black Panther Party or African-American groups, but the new enemy could be Mid-Eastern people or Muslims. And we demonize them as the Panthers were demonized, and then we justify trials without juries, trial without, in military courts. We justify, setting up military courts in Cuba, in Guantanamo. We justify all these things in the name of protecting our country. And what we don't understand is our country falls apart when we do these things, and the legal system falls apart when we let these things happen. And that's the ultimate, not personal story of Geronimo, but the political story, I think.